Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Anais, and I'm a program assistant for the BYU Management Society. Our mission is to grow moral and ethical leadership around the world. We are so excited to listen to and learn from our speaker today. Thank you to those who submitted questions when you registered for the event. Bonnie will be speaking to several of those questions in her remarks. We are also welcoming you to put questions in the Q&A box instead of the chat box throughout the event. Bonnie will take time at the end of the webinar to answer questions from there. In case you were wondering, this event is being recorded, and the link to the video will be available on our website on the webinars page. I'm going to turn the time over to my co-host, Tori, to introduce our amazing speaker.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tori, and I am also a program assistant for the BYU Management Society. I'm excited and honored to introduce our speaker today. Bonnie Oscarson was born in Salt Lake City, Utah, but her family moved around the country several times as she was growing up. She attended Brigham Young University and majored in commercial art. She met her husband, Paul Oscarson, when her family lived in St. Louis, Missouri, and they were married in the Salt Lake Temple in 1969. They are the parents of 7 children and have 29 fascinating grandchildren. Paul and Bonnie served as mission president and companion in the Sweden-Gothenburg mission as a young couple, and then returned to Sweden in 2009 to serve as president and matron of the Stockholm Sweden Temple. She finally finished her bachelor's degree from BYU in British and American literature 41 years after she first began. She is glad she did it, but does not recommend that educational plan. Bonnie was called to serve as the Young Women General President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in April 2003 and was released in April 2018. Since her release, she is enjoying spending time with those fascinating grandchildren and catching up on her reading. She was recently called to be a primary instructor with her husband, and they are excited to find fun ways to connect with their class members during these unusual times. We will now turn the time over to Bonnie.
I'm so honored and privileged to be with all of you today. I am grateful to be a part of the BYU Management Society board and have been doing this for, I guess, a couple of years now. I love that the purpose of this organization is to promote and increase moral and ethical leadership in the world, which is something we really need. So I pray that today's experience will be uplifting for all of you who have taken the time to join with us. I've been blessed to listen to some of the other webinars that have been presented by BYUMS and have always been enlightened and inspired by those. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak to you today. My background is perhaps somewhat different from many of your speakers. I don't come from a business school or a business experience background, but I have been blessed with many experiences in my life, in my home, in the church, and in the community that have helped me develop and think about leadership skills. And so I hope to share with you today the path that learning about leadership has been for me in my life and how I've learned those skills. I think most of us would agree that our lives rarely 100% go the way we plan or think they're going to go. And I've been called to do things in my life and serve in ways that I never, ever would have imagined I would be. But I'm eternally grateful that Heavenly Father saw more in me than I saw in myself and provided opportunities and experiences to serve and to lead in ways that I never would have imagined. And I think that's true for all of us, that we're going to be given opportunities and experiences that we never would have imagined, but will be good for us. I believe very firmly that the Lord knows each of us, and He knows what we're capable of accomplishing during our lifetimes if we're willing to trust Him. And I know that He also is going to want to push us to our greatest possibilities, and that is so that we can grow and progress. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that He trusts us. Recently, President Nelson invited all of us to be willing to let God prevail in our lives. He said that part of the meaning of the word Israel was to be willing to let God prevail, let God prevail. And so when we do that, when we're willing to let God prevail in our lives, then the opportunities open up for us. And he knows what we're capable of, and he knows what's possible. And he will use us as leaders, not just in his kingdom, but I think in the business world and in the community. And I'm grateful for that knowledge. So I also have a real testimony that the Lord knows what's down the line for us, and he provides opportunities for us in our lives that prepare us for what is ahead. I know that that's been true in my life. And so those are some of the experiences I would like to share with you today, are how I followed this pathway to in leadership, and how I learned along the way. It was mentioned that it took me 41 years to earn my bachelor's degree, and that's certainly not an educational track that I would recommend for anybody. But when my children were older and I had more time, I felt very, very impressed that I needed to earn my bachelor's degree. And it was hard for me. It stretched me to the limit. It was, I hadn't, been to school for 40 years, and so it was extremely difficult. There were times as I was working on this that I was wondering, I kept asking myself the question, why am I doing this to myself? Why am I willing to take this time now in my life when I don't plan to use it for a vocation, but I felt like it's something I needed to do. And shortly after I finally earned my bachelor's degree, we were called to serve in the temple in Stockholm, Sweden. We were given opportunities to grow and to learn and to how to manage and how to direct the work there, for which I'm really, really grateful. And so part of the experience of having gone to school and done that hard thing did help me prepare for the next assignment. And it was a great, wonderful leadership training experience I'm going to talk about a little bit more. Shortly after we returned from the temple mission to Sweden, I was called into the Young Women General Presidency and was expected to write talks and to sit in executive councils. And I was so grateful for the experience. My emphasis in my college program was British and American literature, and I was expected to do a lot of writing. I was grateful that I was caused to stretch, that I was encouraged to learn how to write better. So again, the Lord knows what we need down the line, and I think I felt impressed through the Spirit to finish my degree. I was also called in that position to serve on the church education system board, and I was grateful that I had finished my degree and that I had that experience with the BYU Bachelor of General Studies program. So all these things work together when we're willing to let the Lord prevail in our life. So I guess I'm a prime example that there are many different pathways to learning how to gain leadership skills if we're open and willing to do that. And for those of you that have the opportunity to participate in BYU's Management Society and BYU's programs, that is a great blessing. But we can always look for other ways to learn leadership skills. So I've been a member of the church. I'm going to talk about my life a little bit here to kind of give you some background. I've been a member of the church my whole life. And I lived in a small town north of Salt Lake City until I was 9 years old, and then began the life of a nomad. My parents decided that they wanted experiences outside of Utah. And I'm grateful that they were willing to be adventuresome and to do that, and to tell, my father worked for an oil company, and to tell them that he was willing to be transferred. And because watching them as they lived in smaller areas where the church was smaller at the time, they were given opportunities to serve in leadership callings that truly impacted and influenced me. For instance, we were moved to Bartlesville, Oklahoma, which was the headquarters of my father's company. And we had only been there a very short time. I was 12 years old at the time. My father was called to be the bishop of this little ward. We were so new that as we were sitting in sacrament meeting and they announced my father's name, the man who was sitting next to my father turned to him and he said, "Who in the world is that?" To which my father stood up and walked up on the stand, so he found out quickly. But my parents' willingness to accept calls to serve in leadership positions was kind of the beginning of, excuse me, of my pathway to leadership. When I was 14, my family moved to Nashville, Tennessee. And at the time, the church was very small in Nashville. Now there are stakes and temples and everything else in the area. But at the time, there was one little branch in Nashville. And this was a grand education for me. My father was called, we could bring up a picture of my parents here at this point, I think. There they are. That's my mom and dad. They're both gone now, but these are the two people that gave me the beginnings of these leadership skills. So my father, when we were called to, when we lived in Nashville, was called to be the district president, and my mother was called to be the district relief society president. And I was at a very impressionable age 14 to 17 when we lived there. And let me just share an example that I learned from my parents in leadership in this small area. So you can put that picture down if you want. Thank you. One time we were in a branch conference in a chapel in the hills of Tennessee, and it was kind of out there, a small little branch. It was a rented chapel. And one of the things that you do in a branch conference is to sustain the branch leaders. And so my father was conducting, like I said, it was this little rented building. It was summertime and it wasn't air conditioned, and it's hot in Tennessee in the summertime. But my father is conducting and he's sustaining the branch officers. And when he says to the branch, we present this name for your branch president, all in favor, raise your hands. Half of the branch raised their hand. When he said, if there are any opposed by the same side, the other half of the branch raised their hand. And I turned to my mom and, you know, with a look of surprise on my face, I've never seen that happen before, Mom. What happens now? And that's when the leadership lesson learned that day. These were people who are perhaps more humble and maybe not as mature in church government as we had been used to in Utah. But the way my father handled this with his counselors was amazing. He said, we're going to suspend the meeting for now because we would like to talk to each person who has raised their hand to not sustain. And so my father and his counselors took each one of the people who had raised their hands in opposition and on a one-on-one basis and listened to them and talked to them about what their reasons were. I think that has stayed with me through all these years because of the love and respect that my parents showed for everyone. They recognized that everyone has opinions, has talents to give, has ways to serve. And that experience where my father and his counselors took each and every person aside and listened to them and interviewed them was a show of love, of Christ-like love for these people. My parents truly modeled what was the ultimate model of leadership to me, and that was to lead as the Savior Jesus Christ did. And I saw that modeled by my parents. Well, there weren't any significant reasons, and the man was finally sustained. But I remember sitting in that little chapel with my mom in that heat, fanning ourselves, and just watching this whole process. But what a learning experience that living in a small area of the church gave me. I received callings back then because this was a smaller branch that I maybe wouldn't have been able to do elsewhere. I was called to be the branch music leader. So I had to teach myself how to direct music. And I was called to be the magazine representative. So I called people when their church magazines were about to run out. Our youth program meant that we took a lot of responsibility. We wrote our own skits. This was Nashville, Tennessee, which is the music capital of the world, I guess. And so we played the guitar and we formed a singing group and so we sang in youth conferences and that kind of thing. Seminary, living in Nashville, was a soul-stretching experience for me. I had to wake up at 4:30 in the morning, and we drove for a half an hour to the church and had some wonderful seminary teachers. I'm grateful for that sacrifice and for what that taught me. One of the great leadership lessons that my parents taught me during this time was ministering to the one. They embraced the family home evening program, which was on Thursday nights back then, believe it or not. But we always invited people who needed friends to come and join us for family home evenings, for Christmas, for Thanksgiving, for Sunday dinner. We always had missionaries or newlyweds or students or those who are new to the area in our home. My parents showed that each and every individual is important and has something to contribute, and they elevated people. I'm grateful for that example of leadership and ministry that I was shown in my youth. Well, I graduated from high school in 1968 in Nashville, and then my family moved to St. Louis, Missouri, and that's when I began attending BYU. I met my husband on the temple site at Far West, Missouri. That's a story in and of itself because there's not much there, so to have met him there is something we consider to be somewhat of a miracle. We began dating a year later, and we're married, as was said, in 1969. So as we began our family is when I dropped out of school and had to plan that for later. But my husband was hired by May department stores and was an executive with them for several decades. And then the last 2 years of our life, he worked for Macy's department stores because they bought May department stores. But we moved around a lot too. And during the course of his career and our life together, we had 3 children. We were expecting our 4th. In 1976, we were called to serve as mission president and companion in the newly created Sweden Göteborg mission for 3 years. I was 25 years old, and my husband was 29 when he was called, although he likes to point out that by the time we went to Sweden, he was 30. This is a picture of us at the airport leaving to go to Sweden as mission president and wife. We had a newborn, you can see, and we had another baby during the time that we lived there. Our motto, because we were so young and feeling our inexperienced, is anything too hard for the Lord? I'm grateful for the defining experience that this was early in our lives, that it prepared us, that it taught us, that we were able to participate in helping to grow the kingdom in Sweden. The 3 years, I was not your typical mission president's wife because I had this young family. So I was home with my children most of the time. And I was told not to call myself the mission mom, and the missionaries weren't to call me mission mom. But we were trained and we grew and we loved that experience. In fact, I think one of our missionaries may be joining in today. So hi, Elder Chapel, if you're there. Those missionaries, both the brothers and the sisters, became so dear to us and helped us learn and grow. When we came home at the end of that 3 years, I remember having the feeling, how can anything beat this past 3 years? It's all going to be downhill from here on out, because I don't see how anything can come close to that experience. Well, little did I know that the Lord has great things in mind for all of us. During the course of our marriage, we lived in Southeast Missouri. We lived back in St. Louis. We lived in New Jersey, Boston. Then we were in Houston, Texas for 13 years. I was called several times to work as a young women president, again, preparing me perhaps for what was to come. 3 different states. I was a young women president. I taught seminary for 9 years. Again, working with the youth, I had a lot of opportunities to work with the youth. And I think the Lord blessed me to have these experiences because it served me later in great ways. So in 2006, my husband's job brought us to Salt Lake City from Houston, Texas, when May Department Stores was bought by Macy's. And I went back to school. I finally graduated in 2009, 41 years after I had begun school. And so we decided that it was time to take an early retirement for my husband. And I was done with school now, so we were going to serve a mission. So we put in our mission papers and we received a mission call to go to Hong Kong. 10 days before we were to go into the MTC, we received a phone call from President Uchtdorf's office asking if we would meet with him. He changed that mission call to Hong Kong to be the Stockholm Temple President and Matron from 2009 to 2012. It was spiritual whiplash to go from a call to Hong Kong, and then to know we were instead going to Sweden. But we wept tears of joy to think that we could go back to this country that we had grown to love so very, very much. Working in the temple in Stockholm was an interesting leadership position. And it often happens in the church. Here we were as a non-native couple directing the temple. And we learned that it takes humility to understand that others have more expertise than we do in their cultural experiences and their cultural traditions, but we still have the opportunity to maintain the discipline that a temple is supposed to have and the principles that lead that. When I first got to Sweden, I found a document that is called a Conversation on Leadership. And it was with Elder David A. Bednar. It was a leadership forum, and I don't know if it's still being held or not, but it was being held quarterly for leaders of church employees in Salt Lake City. And so it was an interview with Elder Bednar. I really studied this. I felt impressed to study this document on leadership, and also did some research about Elder Bednar. To me, he was just an apostle at the time. But I found out that we have some tremendous talent and leaders within our higher church leadership. Elder Bednar has a PhD in organizational leadership and a huge amount of school experience in leading and teaching in business schools. He's the author of numerous books and articles on leadership and on organizational behavior. And that's just a small portion of all of his accomplishments in that area. So I was grateful to study this document on leadership that is available online. It's called, what did I say? A Conversation on Leadership, and it's from February of 2010. Well, some of the things I learned that helped me in the temple to be a leader was that he said we need to lead as the Savior would. That's probably one of the most ground line principles. He talked about the importance of councils, of governing and leading through councils, of listening to other people, that inspiration and ideas are scattered and that we need to listen to one another and include everyone in that discussion. I was grateful for that. He talked about the importance of listening to the Spirit and being led by the Spirit in our leadership. And one of the principles that he really emphasized was that we should always, as leaders, be training the people we work with to replace us. That leadership is about developing people and helping them to gain competence and capacity and confidence in what they're doing. And that was a great reminder to me that it wasn't about me. It's about those that we work with and helping all of us to grow and develop. He encouraged in this conversation to concentrate less on programs and more on people. And I think Elder Bednar is especially good at that, at working one-on-one with people, helping individuals learn and grow and listening to people. He encouraged to act and not be acted upon, that we need to take initiative, use our own skills and ideas and mindsets and go for things, to not be told everything to do. And one of the most important principles she taught me that has served me throughout my life was not to worry about getting credit for things, not to worry about who's right, but to worry more about what is right and what does the Lord want to have happen. And it doesn't matter who gets the credit as long as it's the right thing. I really tremendously appreciated the leadership principles that I studied in this document and tried to apply them during the time we were in the temple. Again, I was grateful that I had been impressed to go back to school. One of the classes that I took in order to graduate was an advanced language class. And so I took Swedish, and that really improved my Swedish speaking skills, because I was expected in Sweden in the temple to train workers, to talk to those coming for their own endowments, and to lead training and preparation meetings. So I was so grateful again that I had the experience of that school to improve my Swedish skills. Well, we came home from Sweden in 2012, and in January of 2013, I was called to participate in a focus group. I had no idea. I'd never heard of that word. What is a focus group? I didn't know. Well, it was a group of women who were called together. And what I didn't realize that it wasn't very typical in a focus group to have an apostle, a 70, and the current Young Women General President there. But it was an interesting experience, and we were asked questions and discussed things. And so about a month later, in February of 2013, I received a phone call asking if my husband and I could meet with the First Presidency. And those are phone calls that rock your world, that change you forever, and that worry you to death. I had no inclination, I had no premonition of what was going to happen, but we found ourselves walking into a room with the whole First Presidency sitting there, and President Thomas S. Monson called me to be the Young Women General President for the church. I lost it. It was totally a surprise. It was totally coming out of the blue. And I started crying, of course. When I could gain control of myself, I looked at President Monson and I said, President Monson, I don't know anything about how to do this. And he just got a funny grin on his face and he said, well, of course not, Sister Oscarson, we just called you. So I was kind of an out of the box experiment, I think. I had no experience on a general church level. I was kind of an introvert, but that was soon to change. And I'm sure I looked like a deer in the headlights at the time. But as Elder Bednar described it in his Conversations on Leadership, he said, heaven took a chance on me. And it happens to all of us during different times of our lives, especially in church callings, that heaven does take a chance on us. We know Heavenly Father knows what we're capable of. But let me share just a couple of experiences that I had at the beginning of that calling that gave me confidence and reassurance. I really was scared about this, not having had any experience. So many of the women that had preceded me in that calling had come up through the ranks as a board member, a general board member, and then maybe a counselor, and then called to be the president. And I was just coming out of the blue with none of this experience behind me. And I was feeling very insecure about the whole thing. One day I was sitting alone and I was just feeling overwhelmed. I'd been called, but not sustained yet. And I cried out to the Lord and said, how can I do this? And this time an answer came into my head, a thought that was clearly not my own, that came through the Spirit. And the answer was, because I will help you. I cried out again and I said, but why? And the answer came again, because this is my work. I was so grateful to receive that bit of inspiration. That gave me confidence, that helped me to move forward and to know that it wasn't about me, that this was the Lord's work. And because it was his work, he would help me. And I didn't need to be afraid. That said, after I was sustained in April conference and started going into the office every day and found myself sitting in council meetings with apostles and 70s and other church leaders, I started to feel really weighed down. I felt like I was out of my league. They would always turn to those of us in the meeting in this council settings and say, Sister Oscarson, what do you think about this issue we're talking about? And I just felt so out of my league and felt like I just really didn't know a lot of what was going on. And it became hard to even just go into work each day. I was feeling that like, I just don't know if I can measure up to this. Well, one morning in my prayers, as I was getting ready to go into the office, I received a course correction from the Spirit. In that document I talked about, Elder Bednar said, if you haven't been rebuked in your prayers, then you really need to improve the meaningfulness of your prayers. So that day, I guess I was offering a meaningful prayer because I was rebuked by the Spirit. And the Spirit basically said to me in a loving and kind manner, do you realize what a privilege it is you're getting to do this? Do you know how lucky you are? Do you know how blessed you are to get to do this? Just do your best and trust in the Lord. Think back to the answer that he gave you. This is my work and I will help you. And you know what? That rebuke from the Spirit really changed how I started to view things, I realized I don't need to be perfect. I just need to do my best and trust that the Lord will help me. And it changed everything. I felt comfortable saying sometimes I need more information. I don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry, I don't have a good opinion. And I got better as things went on. I just needed to remember that first instruction, that this isn't my work, it's the Lord's work, and that he steps in and will guide it. And he always did. For 5 years in the calling, the Lord was there to help. I learned that it's important to receive counsel and direction from those who are responsible for me. Elder Neil Anderson was a mentor, and he helped to us at the beginning. And I'm grateful for his help in choosing counselors and giving me personal encouragement. When my counselors and I were first set apart, April 10th of 2013, Elder Robert Hales was responsible for the priesthood department at that time. He was the executive director. And he asked if he could meet with us right after we were set apart by the first presidency. And his counsel became a big influence to us for the next 5 years. And what a remarkable experience that was. Elder Hales was not doing well physically at that time. He'd had a lot of health problems. And when he walked into the room, we noticed he had an oxygen tank, and that's what he was carrying behind him. And he seemed very, very fragile and weak. But when we sat down and he started to speak as an apostle of the Lord, the change in him was remarkable. He gained strength in his voice and in his demeanor, and he became an apostle speaking to us. And what he said to us was, there's something big down the road. I don't know what it is, but it's really big and it's a barn burner. And you need to figure out what it is and work on it, and you will find it. Well, what was our barn burner? I think there were several things. This was a time of a lot of discussion about change in the youth programs of the church. We completely redid the camp guide for the young women during the time we were in. It wasn't a global program at all. It was very North American centered. And so hopefully the new guide emphasizes universal principles that can be adapted by young women all over the world for their camping programs. We worked on the Come Follow Me curriculum for the last couple of years that we were in. This was a huge change for the church that was to be, as you know now, home-centered and church-supported. And as we look at what we've been asked to do the last year with the COVID shutdowns and this pandemic all around the world and not being able to attend church often, how amazingly inspired a home-centered learning program is for the church. I think that was part of our barn burner situation too. Did we know a pandemic was coming as we were discussing this in councils? No, we didn't know a pandemic was coming, but we did all feel great urgency and confirmation that this was the correct approach, that we needed to have more home-centered activities, more home-centered learning. And so we worked on, we had curriculum meeting after curriculum meeting to talk about what Come Follow Me needed to be. It also became evident that the church, the young men's program of the church was going to be separating from the Boy Scouts of America program. And we felt inspired as a young women presidency to say, if you're going to change the young men's program drastically, can we please be in step with you and put our programs together and coordinate them? There was large inequality in the amount of money that was spent for the young men's scouting program versus what young women got. And we felt like there needed to be more equity and more cooperation between the two programs. So we did that. We spent meeting after meeting, hour after hour, discussing what the programs for the youth needed to look like. We started the fires, but we didn't completely burn the barn down. That happened after we were released. Others have tended those fires and have continued the program. And again, I go back to what Elder Bednar taught, that it doesn't matter who gets the credit. It doesn't matter who starts things. He knows what's needed and the timing for that. And it doesn't matter who gets the credit for it. I'm just grateful that we could be a part of that process and for the things that we learned and for the ways that we were guided. we had a personal advisor in our Young Women presidency when we were first called. His name was Elder Paul Piper, and he encouraged us to look at things differently. And I think that's a great principle of leadership too. I was grateful for him doing that. He said, don't feel like you have to do things the way they've always been done. He encouraged us to consider something different for our general board. And so the result was we had an international board. We had sisters called, one from Peru, one from Brazil, one from Japan, one from South Africa, one from Brooklyn, kind of a foreign country. And then we had 4 local sisters on our board. And it was a great blessing to be able to work with these sisters all over the world. We managed to find a way to meet once a month with all of our board members. We had to find a time of day that didn't put anybody in the middle of the night. So that was a challenge. And we found we couldn't sing a hymn together because of the delay in video conferencing. We couldn't say the Young Women theme together because of that same delay. But we found a way to meet together and to share ideas. And they reported to us what they were observing in the Young Women program in these different areas of the world. And we worked together to have our programs meet needs from all over the world. So I'm grateful that Elder Piper gave us that encouragement to think outside the box and not feel like we had to do everything the same way it had been done before. And I think that experience with having an international board during that period has opened doors that are happening now with including women. We just heard the announcement that women have been called to the, I can't remember the name of the International Area Organization Advisors. And that women's voices are now going to be heard in area councils around the world and be helping to train the youth programs. And this is in the areas outside of the United States and Canada. I think our board contributed to the fact that that can work. One of the biggest learning situations for me in leadership, serving in the Young Women, was learning how to work together in councils. I think I'd had a lot of callings where I didn't have to be in a council, and I kind of like to be the loner like that. But then sitting in councils taught me that there is great power in getting opinions and inspiration and guidance from a large group of people who are all interested in seeing the right thing done. We started during the time that I was in Young Women meeting with the Primary and Relief Society presidencies on a regular basis. And out of those council meetings came the General Women's Meeting. Before, there used to be a meeting in the spring for the Young Women and one in the fall for Relief Society. And as we talked, we realized that the primary leaders were not having an opportunity to talk to the church and to have an influence. And so out of this council meeting came the General Women's Meeting. And that eventually became a session of conference. So I'm grateful for that opportunity to be part of that counseling together where things evolved, and the restoration is still unfolding, isn't it? And I'm grateful that we learned so much from that. I was called during the time I was in Young Women to serve on the Missionary Executive Council. It was the first time that a woman had ever been called to serve there. And you have to understand that there are 3 main councils that direct the work of the church within the church organization. There's the Missionary Executive Council, there's the Temple and Family History Council, and then there's the Priesthood and Family Council that everything else fits under. And so I was called to serve on this Missionary Executive Council. We met every Wednesday at 1 o'clock. And at the time, Elder Oakes was the executive director, but it also included Elder Bednar, Elder Anderson, Bishop Waddell, and Elder Nielsen. And several other 70s would join us from time to time who served on the board. I was the only woman on that council and was sitting in a room every Wednesday afternoon for a couple of hours with 3 apostles and several 70s. And it was a challenge at first to feel confidence to speak up and speak my mind. But I have to say that the respect that I felt coming from these brethren was tremendous. I was always encouraged to share my opinion or what I was thinking. I learned that it was very important to listen to the Spirit. Sometimes the Spirit would say to me, you need to share that thought you just had out loud. And sometimes the Spirit would say, no, you don't need to share that one. So that became an important thing. But during this time, I got to work with these brethren. We did broadcasts to the missionaries throughout the world. We did press meetings. I got to participate in the dedication of the new MTC. We trained mission presidents and their wives and visitor center leaders. This was a true leadership training opportunity for me. And I'm so grateful for the way in which I was treated even though I was the only woman at the time. I always felt comfortable that I had a place there and that my voice would be listened to. And so it speaks to the fact that sometimes there's not going to be equality in numbers of men and women. But if the attitude is right of all those that are in the council, then I think women will feel like they have a voice and a position to play. Now they have included another woman in each of these councils. So I'm grateful that the church is kind of evolving to see the importance of having women's voices in these kinds of meetings. I was a recipient at times in this experience of serving on this, of personal tutoring. Elder Bednar does have a real emphasis in his life of ministering to the one. And there was one time when he asked if I would help with some training. And he knew I felt a little insecure about it. So he volunteered to come and sit down with me and a few other of the young women leaders one-on-one to talk about how to speak through the influence of the Spirit and how to act. He gave us a training session. I know he had more important things to do that day. He's an apostle. He has tremendous things on his agenda, but he truly showed Christ-like service in giving us personal training and guidance for about 30 minutes that day, one-on-one. I'm grateful for those examples that I saw and that I was the recipient of. I also served on the church education system, and there were 2 women in that group, so that was good. Well, for 5 years, I was out of my comfort zone, and the Lord carried me and he helped me do what I needed to do. I'm grateful to know that heaven trusted me. I'm sure I made some mistakes. I had some important lessons to learn. One of the things I tend to do is to be too blunt at times, and I had to learn to temper that and to be considerate of other people's feelings. One of the marathon things we were asked to do were the international overseas trips. They are marathons. They are filled with training meetings and home visits, missionary meetings and dinners with leaders and press conferences. And there is not a lot of time to prepare adequately for those. But I learned that what the Lord said at the beginning, when I was first called, that he would help me, that he would help make up the difference when there wasn't time, that I could pray and then pray again and receive the help I needed. One of the hardest things I found was writing talks. I'd never felt I was a great writer, but I'm grateful again that I felt impressed to go back to school and hone those skills a little bit. But somebody found a little meme that my counselors and I used often. I'll have you bring this up. It's a dog sitting in front of a computer. And we found if we could follow these rules of writing that things got easier. First rule of writing, sit. Second rule of writing, stay. And I'm grateful for the humor that sometimes helps us to do the things that we need to do. Writing conference talks was a whole different experience in and of itself. Writing a conference talk, you never feel like it's good enough. You know it's going to be published in the Ensign, now Liahona, and used perhaps as lessons. And so it just never felt like, is this good enough for that? But here's what I discovered again. This is his work. And sometimes if I didn't have enough time to keep working on something and perfecting it, I would pray, Heavenly Father, please magnify what I'm trying to do in the hearts of those who will hear it. And he did. Make it what it's supposed to be. And the Lord steps in, and I can't tell you how many times it felt like that happened. So even though our efforts sometimes don't feel like they're all they should be, the Lord can make up the difference. And at the end of I'm not at the end of the pathway yet, I'm still learning and growing, but here's some things that I have learned through my lifetime of learning leadership. And the first and foremost is to lead like the Savior leads. And he does that with great love. For those that he serves and for those with whom we serve, we need to have more love. People are more important than programs. And he encouraged us to learn of me, and he encouraged us to follow him. And so that means we need to know him, we need to learn from him. And he exhibits all of the qualities of leadership that I think we all need to develop. One is humility. Elder Bednar once said, and it's in that discussion, he said, as long as we're clueless, we're dependent on heaven. As soon as we think we know what we're doing, then we tend to rely more on the arm of flesh. In the church, every single one of us has been in the position where heaven took a chance on us. We didn't know what to do. We certainly were not experienced. We were worthy and willing, but heaven took a chance on us. You can take that picture down, but keep that in your mind. Dependence on the Lord, recognizing that I couldn't do anything without his help was an important thing, that humility that Elder Bednar talks about. Remembering that it doesn't matter who gets credit for things. It doesn't matter who's right. What matters is, what does the Lord want to have happen? What is the right thing to have happen? That's a big factor in service that I think not just in the church, but out in the business world too. Trust that revelation and inspiration are scattered, that they come from different sources, and that we need to listen to everyone and to take counsel from one another. The principle of flexibility, to realize that we don't always have to do things the way they've always been done, to be willing to adapt and to change and to try new ideas is an important part of leadership. And the other thing I learned was the importance of having a sense of humor in our leadership. We don't have to take everything so seriously that it takes the joy out of everything we do. We need to be willing to laugh. We need to be willing to find the humor in situations that are difficult. And we need to get to know and enjoy working with our coworkers, be open and be personal and find fun in the work we're doing. Again, I learned the importance of listening to the Spirit, to choose those things that you feel are most important and work hard on those, but remember the humility and to know that the Lord can change hearts, and both yours and others and mine's. Sometimes we had hard decisions to make, and we all do in our leadership positions, but trust in the Lord's help. We are expected to study it out, to pray about it, to seek the best advice and counsel from our workers and co-workers, and then to proceed with the best feelings that we can do and assume that we have a green light and we can move forward. And if it's wrong, I believe the Lord will send a red light. But until you feel that red light, you proceed with the green light and trust that the Lord is guiding things. I think an important part of leadership is gratitude, to express gratitude to those around us who are helping us. And we get it from so many different sources, but it keeps morale and spirits high when those who are in leadership positions take time to express appreciation and gratitude for what everyone is doing to contribute. And finally, I think it takes faith to know that sometimes things are not real clear, but the biggest miracles happen in our lives when we're willing to take a few steps into the darkness and trust the Lord to guide us. Ideas will come when they're needed, but often at the last minute. I feel grateful for the pathway of my life of leadership and for the leadership skills I learned from my parents in my youth, from my ward and stake leaders, and from my own husband. I'm grateful for the experience of sitting in council with some of the great leaders of the church. What a blessing that has been in my life. I'm a different woman now than I was in 2013 when I was called that job. Those who were my mentors and teachers did as Elder Bednar taught in his leadership principles. They trusted me, they encouraged me to share my opinion, and they invited me to step out and try new things. They in heaven trusted me. I'm grateful, most of all, for the great leader we have in Jesus Christ. He called all of us to bring light and life to this world, and he taught moral and ethical leadership in all that he did. And he taught that we can be moral and ethical leaders in our homes, in our church callings, in our school settings, and in the business world. I don't think it needs to be separate. I think that the principles that Jesus Christ taught through his example are important in every aspect of our lives. And we can apply those Christ-like principles of leadership to every area of our lives. I'm grateful that the Lord has blessed me so abundantly to have these experiences. And my prayer is that wherever we are called to lead, that we will follow the example of the master leader, Jesus Christ, because he is our Savior and our Redeemer. And I leave those words with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. I am ready for questions now, so we will go to that portion.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bonnie. And we were very excited to get a large number of questions from those who registered. So here is one of those questions. How have you seen the chance for women to teach and lead in the church change over the years? And how can women lead in a workplace if they are surrounded by men?
I think I mentioned some of these things as I was talking, but for those who might feel that the church leaders are not sensitive to what women feel, I can tell you 100% that is not right. They are extremely sensitive and in tune with the concerns that all members of the church have, and especially women. There's been a lot of discussion about making sure that women's voices are heard more. And I think one of the big revelations for me of big changes in the church with new programs was that it happens slowly. You can't, it's like someone compared it to a large ocean liner that you can't turn on a dime when you're in a large ship like that. And I think the church takes that approach that things can't be changed on, just knee-jerk style. They need to be discussed, and it affects so many people and it affects so many different cultures now that things need to go slowly. But there is a great awareness that women's voices need to be heard, and I think they are more and more. You see women being called to these these leadership councils now, the executive councils, and this change with the International Area Organization advisors is going to be a beautiful, wonderful way for more women's voices to be heard, because they'll be invited to join in area councils with area presidencies to reflect what's going on in the women's organizations of the church. I think that things are happening, and I think we're going to see more and more. It's important for men to be respectful, to say all voices in this council need to be heard. Sometimes there's some old prejudices to overcome, but we need to make sure that everybody's voice gets to be heard, and women need to speak up. And I know that as I traveled internationally, there's some cultures still where women's voices are not valued and heard. And so we played a great role in being women from general church leadership who came in and taught and trained. And that was a revelation to some of the men. And we were often encouraging them, make sure you listen to the women in your councils and make sure that women's voices are heard in ward councils. So I think we're going to see more and more changes continue to happen in that area.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And here's the next question. How do you balance the need to reach the one and minister to the whole?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's a balance of time. There are times when you have to be looking at the big picture and taking care of overall things, overall concerns. But I think it's important to schedule our times and make sure that we always allow time to bring individuals into our sphere. And I think some of the sweetest experiences I had as I was traveling around the country were the home visits. And I was always grateful for the area presidencies who were responsible for scheduling our international trips and what we did on them, when they would take time to allow us to go into young women's homes and to see how they lived and to have a chance to talk to them one-on-one, how the programs were working for them. And so I think it's just, it's remembering that individuals are that's where the rubber meets the road. That's what we need to be in tune with, because and then we need to make sure that we schedule that in our busy schedules. It's so easy to get so caught up in the big picture that we don't take the time. And again, in leadership positions, just sitting down and talking to people. I know one thing we had to remind ourselves as presidency do was to take time to talk one-on-one with our board members, not just have a board meeting, but to take time to interview them individually and say, how are you feeling about what you're doing? And to do this one-on-one. The Savior set the perfect example again. He ministered one by one at times. Sometimes he did big picture, sometimes more often he was interacting with individuals. And we just need to make sure that we make that a priority in our lives.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Tori will now share some questions from the Q&A box.
Okay, so here is one of the questions from the live Q&A. The question is, many times those we are to lead do not seem to respond to our love, our training, teaching, or our invitations. How can we help them to catch the vision?
Well, go back to the last question of maybe one-on-one. If you're seeing that somebody's not responding or falling in line with what you hope will happen, I think one-on-one conversations to say, what are our goals? What are our purposes here? And how can we accomplish those better might bring a conversation around to more sensitivity. And, again, one-on-one doesn't put somebody on the spot in front of other people, and you can have a chance to correct. One of the things that I learned from Elder Bednar too in this conversation on leadership was, if we're afraid to correct somebody, it's usually because we're worried about them not liking us. And he said, that's not showing love. That real love is that sometimes we need to correct and have a frank discussion with somebody, and that it's not about how they feel about us. It's about making sure that things happen that are right. So one-on-one, and making sure that we take the time to do course corrections when needed.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And also thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you all. Thank you for all of those who have been behind the scenes in the technical work. I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I hope it's been worthwhile for all those who have joined in. Thank you. It's been a joy.
It definitely has been. But thank you again. And of course, thank you to all of our audience members who have joined us as well. And we hope that you'll all be able to join us for our next webinar. It's on May 21st at 10 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time with Marilyn Gist. But have a great rest of your day, everybody.